Welcome to PHRP Perspectives, your go-to resource for navigating ethics, compliance, and best practices in human subjects research. Each episode delivers expert insights, practical advice, and real-world stories to help you stay ahead and make informed decisions. PHRP Perspectives is brought to you by PHRP Online Training.
Earn your certification for Human Subjects Protection Training with PHRP Online Training. PHRP offers 2 courses: PHRP Online Training for biomedical or clinical topics, and PHRP SBE, which is designed for social, behavioral, and educational research. Continuing education credits are available for a variety of professionals. PHRP Online Training is available in English, Spanish, and French. Learn more at phrptraining.com.
And now, here is PHRP Perspectives, Ethics, Research, and Compliance.
Hello, I'm your host, Susan Court, and thank you for joining us on PHRP Perspectives. With me today are Joe Smith, PHRP Advisory Board member, and his guest, Andrea Dragan, Director of Quality Assurance and Evaluation at Rutgers, the State University of New Jersey. Today's topic is From Oversight to Impact, Advancing Quality in Human Research Programs. First, here's a little bit about our guests. Joe is a certified IRB professional with 20 years experience in human research protections and regulatory compliance. Additionally, he has 10 years experience as the Conflict Interest Administrator at the University of Maryland College Park and has been the Director of Human Research Protection Program at UMCP for 15 years. Andrea Dragan is the Director of Quality Assurance and Evaluation at Rutgers University, where she oversees compliance, quality, and accreditation efforts supporting thousands of human subjects research studies. She brings more than a decade of HRPP and IRB leadership experience from Rutgers and the University of Maryland. Welcome to you both.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Susan.
It was great to see you. And Joe, thank you for bringing this conversation to us today with Andrea. Tell us a little bit about what you're going to focus on today.
Great. Thanks, Susan. And good to see you, Andrea.
Good to see you too, Joe.
So getting into all of this, for those out there listening that might not be familiar with human research protections, how would you describe your role and why it's critical to ethical research?
Sure. So at its core, my role is about protecting people, making sure that any person who agrees to participate in research is treated with respect, dignity, and transparency. I oversee the systems and processes that ensure that research complies with ethical standards and federal regulations. But it's really more than just compliance. It's about trust. And a big part of my work involves audits and investigations, looking closely at how research is actually being conducted, not just how it's designed on paper. When there are concerns about potential noncompliance, it's my responsibility to step in, assess what's happened, and work collaboratively and in partnership with investigators to understand the root causes and restore compliance. That process isn't, it's not punitive. It's really about accountability, learning and strengthening the system so that issues don't recur. I often think of this role as kind of an internal advocate. So not just overseeing research, but also helping to ensure that the oversight systems themselves are functioning as they should.
No, that's a good point. It's something that we talk about at our institution too, with regards to audits. When we started a program, we got feedback almost immediately that the word audit was scary, and that folks thought that they were in trouble. Have you had those conversations about maybe rephrasing it as compliance review or a compliance check-in, things like that? And I agree with you as far as the educational component too, but I'll let you go ahead.
Sure. So we use the term audit and compliance review pretty interchangeably. I will say that typically for our for cause, meaning that there was something that was reported to us, whether self-reported or from an external individual, that we will call them for cause audits or directed audits. But for our routine program, we usually call them reviews, our routine reviews. This is us coming in and essentially saying, we are verifying that everything is happening exactly as it was approved, because we really do trust and know that our investigators want to be in compliance and following those ethical regulations. And our job is really just coming in and making sure all of that is going exactly according to plan. So we have definitely talked about how audit can seem a little scary, but I think we have a very collaborative approach, which generally puts our researchers and their staff at ease.
Yeah, I think it's important to break down the difference between for-cause check-ins audits versus spot audits and check-ins, which are also very important. I think it helps to build some relationships with folks that you might not normally talk to. We found when we do have those conversations with folks that they have found it very educational because they hear about things that we're looking for that they might not have considered. And there's updates and changes that they might not have known about because of one reason or another. So within the Human Research Protection Program that you work with, what does quality assurance look like, and how does your work specifically influence day-to-day research across a large institution like yours?
Sure. So quality assurance in a human research protection program is both proactive and responsive. On the proactive side, it includes that routine oversight, those routine reviews, like auditing a random selection of studies to get a sense of how research is being conducted across the institution. That helps us identify trends, gaps, as well as opportunities for improvement before they become larger issues. On the responsive side, we also conduct those for-cause audits we just talked about. And those are triggered by a concern or a complaint. And those can involve a much deeper dive into a specific study to understand what's happening and ensure that any issues are addressed completely and appropriately. A key component that ties all of this together is education. We don't just identify challenges. We use what we learn from our audits and monitoring to inform training and guidance and tools for our researchers. The goal is ultimately to help investigators understand expectations and feel confident navigating them. On a day-to-day level, this work really shapes how research is carried out. We're not just reviewing protocols at the front end of, prior to approval, but we're helping investigators think through study design, consent processes, and data protections in a way that's both practical and ethically sound.
So let me ask you a follow-up question about, what might trigger a for-cause review. We get participant complaints here and there, and sometimes they're very minor and they can be addressed quickly. Sometimes they might lead to something a little bit bigger once you start that initial conversation with the investigator. Do you see that, I guess your approach to those sorts of complaints, does that sort of raise red flags for you as far as maybe triggering a for-cause audit, or are there a couple more boxes you need to check before jumping into something like that?
Sure. So anytime we receive something that looks like it potentially could trigger a for-cause audit, our first step is always to speak to the person who submitted the complaint, whether it's a participant, a researcher self-reporting, or another staff or institutional member, to get a sense of what's going on. What caused them to come forward? What about the situation did they feel didn't go quite right? And so once we gather that information, we then will look into study records, look at what was approved, ensuring that there wasn't a misunderstanding on part of the complainant, as well as making sure that we fully understand the protocol inside and out before we go and approach a researcher and their staff regarding an issue. And then once we have conversations, oftentimes it's not a surprise to the PI and the staff that, we're contacting them. They may have said, we did have kind of a misunderstanding with the participant, or we felt that the participant may have been unhappy with the way that something went. It's not usually a shock. And we always approach, our for-cause audits even with, we're trying to restore compliance. We're not a policing body. We are a partner with every researcher here at Rutgers, and we partner with them so they can understand why, the issue has been brought up and what needs to change to ensure that participants feel comfortable and safe and are really being treated to that, highest ethical standard while they're participating in research. And overall, it's, I find that it tends to be a very collegial process, even if it does start a little bit with some reticence on the part of the PI.
Yeah, I think you're right. The restorative approach is a really great way to get out in front of everything with the conversations that you need to have at the beginning, middle, and end, really. And arming yourself with the knowledge of the protocol shows that you care, you've taken the time to get to know what's going on. Because, as you and I both know, there's thousands of projects that we have to manage across, the university and the human research protection area. So that sort of leads me into the next question here. So, thinking about these thousands of active research projects that are happening at any given time across the university, how do you balance the regulatory rigor and requirements with supporting the researchers and innovating in this area?
Sure. I mean, I think that balance is really the heart of the job. I mean, regulations are essential. They give us necessary guardrails and guidance, but they can't become barriers. I think one of the toughest battles that you can have as an auditor is first and foremost communicating with researchers that you are partnering with them. And second, and equally challenging, is that you're there to help conduct the research as the PI developed it. I try to approach this from a mindset of how do we get to yes responsibly? Instead of defaulting to restriction, we work with our investigators to find solutions that meet regulatory requirements while still allowing the science to move forward. I mean, a huge part of that, and I know I've said these terms a lot already in our conversation, is it's communication and education,
You're right.
helping researchers understand not just what the rules are, but why they exist. When people understand the intent behind the regulations, it becomes much easier to collaborate and find workable paths forward and keep that, flexibility and innovation at the forefront of the science.
Yeah, I agree. There's so much interpretation that we're called on to do with the regulations. It's easy to read the regulations according to the letter of the law, as it were. But if you really take the time and you read the words that are in there, they're set up in such a way that they want us to interpret them as it pertains to our program at our institution, whether you're a giant R1 institution or you're a small liberal arts college that might only have, a half a dozen or, a couple dozen, let's say, human subject research protocols. You have to be a little bit more careful in how you apply those regulations so you don't come off as being overbearing when the majority of the research is minimal risk. So,
Right.
yeah, it's tough and but it's a good challenge, I think.
Absolutely.
So with that leading into the next one here, so can you pick a moment that or an initiative, something that you've done or your office has done, where you've meaningfully improved the research, how the research has been reviewed at your institution or conducted, supported, anything along those lines?
Sure. So, one initiative I've focused on bringing to the quality assurance and evaluation team here at Rutgers is really bringing more transparency and dialogue into the audit and oversight process, which has really shifted how we're perceived and experienced by investigators. I mean, the fear response is natural anytime you receive a notice of something related to noncompliance or a complaint. And so before we even begin an audit, whether it's a for cause or a routine, our team shares a brief bio with the study team so that they know who they are, what our expertise is, and what to expect. I think something that can be a little unnerving is the PI knows that us as the reviewers, we know everything about them. We've read their protocol, we've read all of their, documents, but now here's someone that they've maybe never engaged with in the Human Research Protection Program saying, we're coming in and we'd like to talk to
Right.
you. So it's a small step, but it does help humanize the process as well as set the tone that this isn't a gotcha exercise,
Mhm.
but it's a professional collaborative interaction. So throughout the review, we also make a point of sending summary emails after key conversations or meetings. This gives the investigators an opportunity to clarify anything, correct misunderstandings, or add context to things that we may have witnessed during a conversation or during a review. So it turns what could feel like a one-way evaluation into a two-way partnership. And we also close the loop intentionally. And I think this might actually be the most important part. So at the end of an audit, we hold a closeout discussion with the PI and the study team to walk through any findings, share recommendations, as well as offer real practical guidance moving forward. And we don't stop at just identifying the issues, but we connect investigators with different resources, such as we have a draft services team here at Rutgers that will do one-on-one consultations with our researchers to really help build their protocol and work through the regulations. So you're not retrofitting compliance into the research, but really building it in from the beginning. And that really has helped with strengthening the approach of compliance and researchers as a partnership moving forward. So building in transparency at every step, creating space for real dialogue. We've seen a real meaningful shift in how we're received, whether it's during a routine or a for-cause audit as a team.
And that's great. I think your comment about resources is, I think, really important for folks to remember. You can send out, emails weekly. You can send out listserv blasts. You can remind the chairs to distribute things to the department. We're just inundated with emails. Everybody is. And if you do have that opportunity for one-on-one, and you can sit down and say, hey, look, we have these things here available for you on the website, or, behind the central login. It's all here. It's all for you. And, bookmark this. And if you forget that it's there, just drop us a line. We'll send you the right thing.
Right.
So just know that it is available. In most cases, I think, our larger institutions have resources enough to be able to generate guidance, and whether it's through a scribe, it's through PowerPoints, any of that stuff. So it's easy to read. I think that's great. It's that's one of the parts of quality assurance and quality improvement that I look forward to being able to do, because it sets them up for success down the road, because it saves them time from contacting us and from us having to respond to them, and everybody can move forward and, like you said, not be a barrier to getting things done.
Yeah. I think something that's important to notice, it's something that now, being on the quality assurance side, I was on, the IRB side of the house for such a long time, but something I've noticed is that, being on the post-approval monitoring side of the compliance process is you get more face time with researchers and their staff than really you do in the pre-approval side of the process. I'm meeting with them over Zoom. I'm going to their lab spaces. I'm, engaging in multiple conversations with them. And so I don't want to misuse that opportunity or not use that opportunity to the fullest to let them know about things that would be helpful, to let them know about the resources that your colleagues spend tremendous amount of time developing to ensure that the process for both, the researchers as well as us as compliance professionals run more smoothly. So I think it's imperative to take advantage of that face time to promote your colleagues and the resources and the amazing work that they're doing.
Yeah, you're right. Building relationships is what it's all about.
Yeah.
So let's keep moving along here. So, it's a never-ending carousel with regulations, technology, research methods, and they keep evolving and changing. So how do you see the role of human research protections changing, and how are you preparing your program for that future?
Sure. The landscape is certainly evolving quickly. Especially things like big data, AI, decentralized trials, increasingly complex collaborations. Traditional oversight models don't always map neatly onto these new approaches. And so going forward, I think our role will need to be more adaptive and risk-based, less of a one-size-fits-all and more tailored to the actual risks of any given study. We'll also need to be more integrated into the research lifecycle, engaging earlier and more continuously. To prepare, I focus on flexibility, ongoing staff training, and building those stronger relationships, like you mentioned, Joe, with our researchers. Just as importantly, we're thinking about how to maintain ethical principles like respect for persons, informed consent, in environments that look very different from traditional clinical trials or traditional research as we've known it up until today. So at the end of the day, the core mission doesn't change, but how we operationalize it absolutely does.
Yeah, I think one of the first things you mentioned was um, it can't be a one size fits all. And I think for those of us who've been around in this space for a long time, probably tried that at some point very early in our careers and found that that leads almost immediately to friction between the office and the research community. And I think once you experience that a few times, you realize, well, maybe this isn't going to work out in the long term. So what can we do to make this a little bit smoother for us and for them? Because the first thing you realize is, man, this is making my job very difficult. How can I make my job a little bit easier? And then once you start thinking about that, you realize, oh, wow, if I make their job a little bit easier, it makes my job a lot easier too. And I think when you start getting into that headspace, it really leads down the road to innovation, like we talked about, the flexibility, and something I keep coming back to is interpretation of everything that's out there, specifically the basic regulations at 45 CFR 46. I think that's a trap for new people to fall into, is that has to be, it has to be a one size fits all. But it's really not. You have to use some creative thinking, and get in there and see how it applies to your specific situation, and then pull back, look at the next one, and see if you need to apply it differently to that one. And I think that ultimately leads us to where we are today, and that's being in charge of a few very successful programs that are both accredited and have been working towards building solid relationships with our research communities for a long time.
Absolutely.
So and we've kind of hit all of our questions here. Is there anything else that you might want to talk about or bring up as far as quality assurance and human research protections is concerned?
Sure. I mean, the last comment I'd have is, thinking about, I think, we talk a lot about how research is changing, how the settings are changing, how the focus and, with the increase in AI and things like that.
Right.
I think that it's easy to think that as research becomes more complex, so do the way we apply the regulations. But I actually have the complete opposite attitude. I think we need to go back to simplification. I think we really need to think about, what do the regulations actually say, and recognize that, even though we do have a lot of tools at our disposal, AI being kind of the hot topic of the day, that, we are here because of our ability to critically think, to apply those regulations, but that we don't need to think that complex research means complex application. I think simplification is really the way that as compliance professionals, we need to keep at the forefront of our mind to ensure that we're really thinking about complex research in a way that, doesn't, how do I say, it's the complexity of the research doesn't have to be reflected in the way that we apply the regulations. And so
Right.
I always tell my team, and I think we're focused here as an institution a lot on simplification. Let's work with our researchers and take what can feel complex and difficult to navigate, which then translates in a way to barriers back to partnership and to working together.
Yeah, all great points, Andrea. And it's been great talking to you about this today. Really appreciate you taking the time. These are things that we need to keep talking about, I think, every couple months, couple times a year, to stay on top of things, stay fresh. So I think that about wraps it up for us today. And I just want to say thanks again.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been such a pleasure.
Thank you, Joe and Andrea. Great conversation, very insightful. And I especially loved how your industry is starting to apply the use of artificial intelligence. And so important, as you said, to remember to keep humans in the loop as you're using AI to simplify the very complex. Thank you, Joe and Andrea, for joining us today. If you have any questions about this topic, please feel free to reach out to us at info@phrptraining.com. We hope that you subscribe to PHRP Perspectives and join us again next time.